You're good? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, my microphone button was being strange. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Happy Friday and welcome to this morning's Audit Committee meeting. I'll give you a quick run through of our agenda this morning. Je vous offre tout d'abord un bref survol de l'ordre du jour de ce matin. The first item will be an update to the OAG's audit charter. There's no formal presentation, but I believe the Auditor General may have a brief explanation. or we will look to the Auditor General and see what she thinks. The item is to be received, and we would recommend that Council consider and approve it. The second item will be the audit of prevention of workplace violence and harassment. Our Auditor General, Nathalie Goujon, has a 10 to 15-minute presentation. Following the presentation, the Auditor General will take questions from committee members and then any other members of Council that are present. Following that, you will be able to ask staff questions as well. Par la suite, vous aurez l'occasion de poser vos questions au personnel également. For our staff who are participating via Zoom, if you are answering a question, if you can, please turn your cameras on. We'll then vote on receiving the item and sending recommendations forward to Council. Our third item is a walk-on item. It didn't make the original agenda. It's an investigation of the Manotick Business Improvement Area, expenses, and the role of the City of Ottawa. We will require a motion to add this to the agenda. Nous aurons besoin d'écrire une motion qui sera ajoutée à l'ordre du jour. There are actually two reports here, one on the city's role, which we can discuss, and a second on the investigation itself. The second report is for information purposes only, and will be discussed and presented to the Manotick BIA board. Our Auditor General will provide a 10-minute presentation. Following the presentation, the Auditor General will take questions from committee members and then any other members of Council that are present only in regards to the city's role. Following that, you'll be able to ask questions, but also on the city's role only. We would then vote on receiving the report and recommend Council adoption. Nous procéderons ensuite à un vote concernant le dépôt du rapport du Conseil et son adoption. And finally, our fourth item will be an in-camera update. It's a preliminary report on cybersecurity. We've invited all members of Council to participate, and I welcome those who have joined us. And you should have been sent a separate Teams link for that meeting when we get to it. We will require a motion to move in camera when we get there. The Office of the Auditor General will have a 10-minute presentation. Le Bureau de la Vérificatrice Générale donnera une présentation qui durera 10 minutes. Following the presentation, committee members can ask questions to the Office of the Auditor General. If there are other members of Council present, you may ask questions of the Auditor General following committee members. We will then take questions for staff. Please note, as that is an in-camera session, no meeting details will be reported out. This is for your information only. All right, let's get started. Alors, commençons. All right. Before we proceed, I will ask the committee coordinator to do a roll call of all members.
Hill.
Present.
Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Carr.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Vice Chair Brown.
Here.
Chair Curry.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Our next item is confirmation of the minutes. Audit committee minutes of Audit committee minutes 2 from June the 9th, 2023. Audit committee confidential minutes 2 from June the 9th, 2023. Audit Committee and Transit Commission minutes 1 from June 9th, 2023, and Audit Committee Transit Commission confidential minutes June the 9th, 2023. The minutes noted on the agenda, are these minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed, thank you. Item number 4, Auditor General, Office of the Auditor General Audit Charter.
Thank you very much. This item is a little bit administrative in nature. We have an audit charter that governs how we do our work here at the Office of the Auditor General. And as part of the most recent governance review, there were changes to the audit committee terms of reference, as well as the Auditor General bylaw. So those changes have just been updated and reflected into our audit charter. So it's just to align our audit charter with those two documents.
Wonderful. Anyone have any questions on that? All right, is this item carried then? Carried, thank you. All right, item 4.2, Office of the Auditor General Audit of the Prevention of Workplace Violence and Harassment. We have a presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair. If we could please share the presentation.
Okay, people, you may have microphone problems.
Le premier rapport que nous souhaitons vous présenter aujourd'hui porte sur la vérification de la prévention de la violence et du harcèlement au travail. Avant d'entrer dans les détails de ce rapport, permettez-moi de vous donner l'idée de l'objet de ce rapport. This audit was selected due to significant upswings in reports of allegations of violence and harassment across North America over recent years. While various movements have drawn additional attention to what has always been a very important issue, many organizations continue to struggle on how best to tackle this very delicate subject. Our report highlights the need for greater prevention of violence and harassment in the workplace. To achieve this and to implement several recommendations made by my office, the city will require additional resources to minimize risks and costs today, as well as in the future. Furthermore, leadership at all levels must clearly demonstrate its commitment to these very important matters. This is essential to gaining employees' trust, both in management and in the process. While the city continues to take steps to prevent violence and harassment in the workplace, it is very important to acknowledge that cultural changes may not be realized, at least not fully, for years to come. Permettez-moi de remercier le personnel de la ville qui a participé à notre mission de vérification, de ses efforts et de sa franchise dans les réponses apportées à nos questions ainsi qu'à notre sondage. Je vais maintenant céder la parole à Joanne Gorenstein, vérificatrice générale adjointe, ainsi que Ria Khanna, vérificatrice principale chargée de mener cette mission. Merci beaucoup. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît.
Good morning. Per legislation, all employers have an obligation to ensure that the health and safety of employees is protected while they're working. Specifically, the Canada Labour Code and the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act set out the rights and duties for occupational health and safety of all parties in the workplace. The city has a unique context of being both subject to both provincial and federal legislative requirements. The city has a workplace violence and harassment policy and related procedures which outline the city's commitment to a safe, healthy, and respectful workplace and to ensure that all incidents of workplace violence or workplace harassment are addressed appropriately. The current workplace violence and harassment policy has encompassed the requirements of both the federal and provincial legislation and applies to all employees within the city. Next slide, please. The objective of this audit was to assess whether the city has established and implemented procedures and processes to ensure a safe, healthy, and respectful workplace, free from all forms of violence and harassment, and is in compliance with legislative and regulatory requirements. The audit examined the following elements: compliance, governance, training and awareness, capacity, monitoring, and reporting related to workplace violence and harassment at the city. As part of the audit, we developed and administered an employee survey using an independent third party to obtain feedback from staff and management. 22% of the city employees participated in this survey. I will now pass over the presentation to Ria to walk through the findings. Next slide, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Joanne. We noted that significant efforts have been made to develop and implement the workplace violence and harassment policy to reflect both federal and provincial legislation. We also found, through a sample of files reviewed, that workplace violence and harassment complaints are generally addressed in accordance with the city's policy and procedures. Notwithstanding, we identified areas for improvement for the city to focus on as it continues to evolve the program and deal with an increasing volume and complexity of complaints. The first set of findings are related to governance and strategy. Our audit found that there's currently no holistic strategy or plan in place for the workplace violence and harassment program. Further, it was indicated that there's been limited focus on this file from leadership as a collective body to date. Currently, workplace violence and harassment is discussed once annually by senior leadership as part of the Occupational Health and Safety Report. We noted that ongoing discussions regarding workplace violence and harassment has not historically taken place at the senior leadership table. While leadership within individual departments have made efforts to promote the messaging of a violence and harassment-free workplace, it was indicated that this is primarily ad hoc, where discussions are had informally or when cases come up that require attention. Without demonstrated efforts from senior management, there's a risk that employees will not have trust or faith in leadership or believe that workplace violence and harassment is a priority for the organization. The introduction of Bill C-65 within the Canada Labour Code emphasized the importance of prevention, with the expectation that organizations put in place mechanisms to not only detect and address workplace violence and harassment, but also prevent it. There's been limited capacity to support prevention activities, and as a result, no formal strategy has been established for the prevention of workplace violence and harassment. While we did see some evidence of activities to support prevention efforts within individual departments, these activities are being undertaken based on the discretion of the department, as there's no overarching direction from corporate leadership. Not focusing on prevention can result in the city constantly being in a reactionary state and can create several risks, such as non-compliance with legislation, reputational risks, direct and indirect financial costs. These can all impact the overall culture of an organization. Next slide, please. The next set of findings are related to the topic of capacity. The Workplace Violence and Harassment Program is centralized within the Workplace Safety and Compliance Unit. This group is responsible for administering the policy, managing complaints, and supporting departments with ad hoc prevention activities. At the time of the audit, of the 7 employees in this unit, only 2 were assigned to exclusively support this file. With the program manager, these 2 members are responsible for administering and overseeing the Workplace Violence and Harassment Program for over 17,000 employees. The increasing volume of complaints, along with managing the program administratively and supporting departments, has put significant pressure on this unit. It was indicated that there's no capacity for strategic planning or for proactively addressing prevention. Their work is largely reactive, opportunistic, and focused on crises. The limited resourcing within this unit, could put the sustainability and credibility of the program at risk, including the significant efforts made to date. The next finding is related to the capacity of internal investigators. The Workplace Safety and Compliance Unit is responsible for assigning investigators when a formal investigation is required or has been requested. Investigations can be conducted either by internal investigators, who are a select group of full-time staff that volunteer to conduct these investigations over and above their full-time jobs, or external consultants. It was indicated that there's not enough capacity within the internal investigator pool to support the increasing volume of cases. In some instances, these internal investigators were managing 2 to 3 cases simultaneously over and above their substantive job requirements. The use of volunteers to conduct investigations can also have quality and consistency impacts. While internal investigators are provided baseline training, it is acknowledged that this is not their full-time job. This means that they may not perform these investigations on a regular basis to become skilled at conducting them, and many do not have previous experience or backgrounds relative to workplace violence and harassment. The current model for investigations at the city is generally centralized. That is, complaints are received by the Workplace Safety and Compliance Unit and triaged. The Ottawa Paramedic Service is the only service area who has its own full-time investigators. The Professional Standards Unit, a separate group from operations, was responsible for conducting workplace violence and harassment investigations prior to the release of the updated workplace violence and harassment policy in 2021. There are benefits and risks with allowing departments to maintain their own investigators and decentralizing specific responsibilities. However, The purpose of having a centralized function is to support independence, objectivity, and consistency. Having investigators housed within departments may make staff feel less safe in reporting incidents, especially in areas where there are known cultural issues. Next slide, please. The last set of findings are related to training and awareness. Workplace violence and harassment is a complex topic and requires sufficient training and awareness across all levels of the organization to ensure it is understood and front of mind. Supervisors and managers play a significant role within the program and are required to fulfill several responsibilities per the workplace violence and harassment policy. When well equipped, middle managers and first-line supervisors can be an organization's most valuable resource in preventing and addressing workplace violence and harassment early on. Despite their role, we noted that there's no dedicated training for managers and supervisors related to workplace violence and harassment. Without sufficient training on this topic, supervisors and managers may not be equipped to fulfill their responsibilities effectively or in a timely manner, which could result in a negative workplace culture and a lack of confidence from staff. All employees are required to complete the city's mandatory virtual training course. This training is a one-time awareness exercise that does not fully support an employee's understanding of what workplace violence and harassment can look like and how it can manifest within their operational environments. Despite recent improvements, the training program is still at the awareness level and does not sufficiently address the topic of prevention, the responsibilities of each stakeholder, and the resolution processes available. One-time awareness training on a complex subject like this is not sufficient to support employee understanding or ensure that it continues to be top of mind. Further, if people do not understand what harassment is within their operational context, there is the potential that occurrences either go unreported or result in inappropriate complaints made. The audit made 9 recommendations and management has agreed to all of them. Next slide, please. If it pleases the chair, we would be more than happy to take any questions committee members may have related to this audit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the entire Office of the Auditor General. It's a very important audit. Maybe we consider every audit important, but this is a very important audit. And I would note, committee members, that I believe every single member of the senior leadership team is here in the audience right now listening to this. So I would thank you all very much for coming here. You clearly recognize how important this audit is. So I'm going to go to the city manager for a comment first, and then we'll take questions. We'll have questions for the Office of the Auditor General.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I really appreciate it. This topic is extremely important to myself, to the senior leadership team, as well as the entire organization. And we appreciate the work that the Auditor General and her team have done on this. I want to start this morning by reiterating here at the city that our people are our priority. City staff are at the heart of our organization. There's no question. They're working hard every day to deliver services 24/7 to our residents and everyone else in our community. And as my role as city manager, a critical aspect of my job is to ensure the health and safety and well-being of all employees. That's at the heart of the organization. And given the results of this audit, with some staff members coming forward and indicating that they do not feel or haven't always felt safe at work, is quite frankly unacceptable. I want to be clear that the city has a zero tolerance policy when it comes to forms of violence and harassment in the workplace. And every single employee is entitled to a safe and healthy workplace. The findings from this report show that we as an organization have work to do. There's no question. And I want to take the opportunity right now to ensure all employees at every level of our organization that the senior leadership team is committed to taking action to address the findings in the report. We are in full agreement with the Auditor General's recommendations, and some of them have already been implemented, and there is others where we are making progress on, and we're going to continue to work on those until they are fully implemented. And what I do find encouraging based on the audit and the work that the Auditor General and her staff have done, is that staff feel comfortable enough to come forward and telling us that they aren't feeling safe at work. That's really important, and that's really good messaging for us. I think this is very good evidence in terms of our workplace violence and harassment policy is an effective tool, but we know there's progress to make, and it is good progress. And while our workplace violence and harassment program is continuously improving, we also see this as an opportunity for change and renewal in the organization. And as an organization, we're always evaluating how to make ourselves better. We know we have work to do, but I think it's fair to say that we've also taken some strides forward. And I think a good example of that is how our organization handled the pandemic. We were applauded by the work that we did in several areas, including mental health, as well as equity and diversity. We listened to staff. We acted on their needs. They told us what they were, and we put additional mental health and wellness supports in place. And I think, it's because of the work that we had done that staff are comfortable to come forward when there is an issue. And we're going to continue this in terms of the environment and the organization that we are and how we present ourselves. And as I mentioned this before, and I think it's worth repeating, the senior leadership team is taking this very seriously, and we look forward to implementing all of the recommendations and strengthening our program here at the city. We're committed to reinforcing a culture of accountability and trust while ensuring physical, emotional, and psychological safety for our people so that everybody feels that they can bring their whole selves to work. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for indulging me this morning.
Thank you. Very important, I think, to hear from you. All right, questions from committee members. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General, and thank you to the City Manager for that statement. I appreciate it very much. And yes, I did notice the general managers are present, and I think that's an excellent sign that they're serious. We're taking this seriously. As the former liaison on women and gender equity in the last session, it was a big role, and it was something that was obviously front and center. Frankly, it's very difficult to talk about, but I'm glad it's over. And I think a lot of this may have come out of that. And frankly, that's not the way it should be. It should have been in place before. And I think that's what we're getting at. We need to have prevention and education. I noticed in the report, you're talking about sort of that dilemma of having centralization and also having managers running their departments and having their own person in charge. I think it's really important that this person be a neutral third party. We discovered that with Councillors Rowe. We're all managers as councillors. We're all managers, and we need training, all of us. So I think it's really important that we have that our staff have someone to go to that's not us. That if they have an issue, they should be able to talk to someone. So it's extremely important. In terms of questions, I just wanted to ask about other municipalities and what you've seen out there. Is this something that is being handled in other municipalities, and have we had any lessons learned?
Auditor General.
Thank you for the question, Chair. We did do some benchmarking with other municipalities, and obviously this is a very important topic. It's taken seriously in these municipalities as well. It's consistent with the City of Ottawa. I think some of the differences really just stem from organization and how the different organizations do structure just in order to allow for focus specifically on workplace violence and harassment. But obviously, subject and implementing the similar programs with some different tools that we've discussed with management. Thank you.
Thank you. In the last session, I worked with staff to organize a session for councillors, but we haven't had one this session. Is that something that can be done? Because I think that that's important just for councillors to realize what is classified as harassment, and I don't think anyone should assume that they know.
So Chair, I guess I'd just like to emphasize that obviously our report can only cover City of Ottawa employees. It doesn't extend to that of councillors because that's outside of our purview. I do agree with you. I think it's important for anybody in any form of supervisory managerial role to have training, both initial and refreshers. So I would say that something similar to what we're recommending would probably be beneficial, most definitely. But I would look to city staff more so, I guess, from the clerk's office as to whether that's something that they'd be able to provide.
Thank you. One of my concerns is that we're talking about hiring extra staff to be in these roles that you were talking about, like 2 people representing 17,000 employees. Clearly that's not good enough, but I'm concerned, maybe this is a question for the city manager, if there's a commitment to make sure we have proper staffing, given that we have a very austere budget coming up. I'm concerned about that. But on the other side, I see it as a way to retain staff if we have prevention and education, so that people will stay with us longer. But I just want to get a commitment that we're looking in that.
City manager?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor, for the question. And we are committed to staffing this. We can talk to you about what that's going to look like when we get around to the staff questions, if that's okay.
Yep, that's fine. But again, I realize that the councillors are in a different category, but let's be honest, that's when people come into these jobs, and I have 30 years experience previously on Parliament Hill, where the same issues were dealt with in the same way. I think it is important. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. So we'll try to do all questions to the Auditor General and then to staff, but I mean, I know that one flowed right into the other, but we'll see if we can try to do that. Councillor Lowe?
Thanks, Chair. So in the report, it says that, over 17, all the employees received the survey, right? And in the 3,697 responses that you got, is there, did you see any patterns in terms were these all supervisors, managers? Were these exclusively or almost exclusively people with regular computer access? Because I think a lot of our employees are your outside employees who might not see their computer or might not even have a computer or an account. So was that taken into account when doing the survey?
Sure, I will start to answer that question, and I'm sure my staff will add to that. So our survey did have some demographic questions with regards to understanding what department they were in, what service unit they were in, whether they were part-time or full-time. So that helps a little bit from understanding what type of work they might be doing and what environment they might be in. That being said, we specifically chose not to dive too far deep into being able to identify specific smaller groups. And the reason for that is to allow people to feel comfortable coming forward. We do have some smaller working areas within the city, and sometimes that tends to have people a little less likely to want to complete these types of surveys. So we did obtain some, and we did share some additional information with the city manager's office in order to help pinpoint certain areas. Most of what we saw was generally consistent across the city as a whole. So it wasn't like one department was completely skewing the results. Some were more consistently on the higher end of the department. So we have shared that, but generally speaking, our recommendations and our findings really are horizontal across the city as a whole.
Just to answer the second part of your question in terms of the approach to the survey, recognizing that absolutely the majority of employees for the city don't have a regular, not sitting at a desk in front of a computer, we tailored our methodology such that it was available by a QR code on anyone's personal smartphone. We advertised the survey obviously by email to all staff, but also had departmental representatives posting posters with the QR codes all over city facilities, on TV screens in city facilities, sending out multiple reminders. So we did do our best to get the word out and made it easy for people to complete it. Obviously, you know, 22% is a good percentage, but you know, we knew we weren't going to get couldn't obviously always get the highest response rate. But thank you.
Yeah, no, having come from one of those frontline positions, I know a lot of the opinions that get shared amongst that kind of stuff. So no, it's fine. Second question about you know, we contract out a lot of our work, and when that happens, do we also look at if those contractors have something like programs like a workplace violence and harassment prevention strategy, or do we deliberately ask them for one? Or anything like that, because they're not direct employees, but they work for the city. Do work for the city.
So I guess it wasn't necessarily a part of our scope per se, but and again, like the mechanism, I guess, in terms of this would be more related to procurement and what's in the contracting for them. But I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of management.
Yeah, and second thought, that may be a city manager question for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Chair. For the Auditor General, you mentioned that your review did not include councillors in that, and your recommendations are geared towards city staff, and I appreciate what the city manager said she's going to do on that front. But I'd like to get some direction from you as to how we make this apply to councillors, because we should not be excluded from such an important rule, and neither should we be putting our heads in the sand and pretending this doesn't happen. There was a motion by Councillor El Centuri at the end of the last term of council to try to get something going with that. Was that something that you looked at all through this, or you have any information on?
Chair, thank you very much for your question, Councillor. While I 100% agree with you with regards to the importance of this even being directed towards councillors, unfortunately, in my role, I cannot make a comment with regards to policies that govern members of council. So I apologize. It's just outside of my purview and I can't speak to it.
Do you have any idea who would be responsible for that? Like, who should we be going to for those of us on council that want to protect our employees from predators? And I'm not using that term loosely at all, because I've been around long enough to see some of this behavior and hear stories of it as well. So I really think that we have to do something here. So where do we go to get help with that?
Chair, I would say first and foremost, if we're speaking about councillor staff, I do just want to clarify that councillor staff definitely do fall within the purview of this policy and fell under the purview of our within scope for our audit. So these recommendations do extend to councillors' staff. They just don't extend to councillors themselves. And so I would direct that question to staff with regards to what they would be able to provide to assist councillors with this regard.
Okay, great. So it does cover, for now, it will cover councillors, staff, and assistants. Was any consideration given to recommending something like your fraud waste hotline, for example, where they can report anonymously and you're not reporting behavior to somebody that's in a close working relationship with the person that's doing the bad behavior?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. Chair, I'll start to answer that question. I'm sure my staff can give some additional details. So there is a process where individuals, employees can come forward and report anonymously. Unfortunately, the fraud and waste hotline is not an aspect. Obviously, the mandate of the fraud and waste hotline is not to take those items in. What I can state is we frequently get these types of reports, and we do have to redirect them to the appropriate unit. But I'll let my staff speak a little bit more to perhaps the details of that process.
Thank you. No, I guess I would just add, I will just reiterate what the Auditor General said. There is a, like, HR does have a process and a mechanism for reporting and honestly any concerns about workplace violence and harassment, and obviously would turn to management when it's their questions to go over the process, but there definitely is a mechanism and a process for it.
But I think we can all agree it hasn't really worked, or it's not working well enough. Like I'd like 100% protection of our staff. So it's something worth exploring. Okay, Madam Chair, what I'll do is, because my questions are focused more around council and councilors' assistants, because I have every faith in our city manager to make sure that city staff are okay. So maybe what I'll do is I'll hold off and will I be able to direct questions to the clerk's office to try to get answers on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say that after we go to
Okay.
staff, the clerk's office probably has a comment for you.
That's perfect. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the audit. It's a good reminder of how important the role of audit is in an organization. When you have findings such as this that can really change how an organization operates. I have a fairly specific question, and I think that it may be might be a little bit more for staff, but I'll start asking yourself, Auditor General. In reading through the reports and recommendations, a lot of the focus is on training and for managers and supervisors. And I think there's a recommendation 7, which speaks a little bit about general training the recommendation I think is every 3 years, that it would be I don't know if that was specifically in the recommendation, but that there would be general training. It's been widely reported that one of the greatest increases in workplace violence has to do with domestic violence within the workplace, and that often this is something that can happen to employees who are working in the workplace, whether it be stalking, threats, and it's on the rise. And I believe that when I was with the federal government, I think I did the training module, and it's one of the most, I think it is the area where there is the most, that leads to the most workplace violence, or there was statistics and studies. And I noted in the report that there was nothing specific about that. And I guess when I was reading the report, because it was so heavily focused on training for supervisors and managers, I think that should be something, could that be considered as part of a recommendation in the overall training for staff? Because often what happens is employees tend to have discussions with colleagues and not necessarily their managers, and learning to recognize that is really, really important. And I know earlier this year, Council declared domestic violence, or not domestic violence, intimate partner violence to be an epidemic. And it is something that is really, really important in the workplace. And I wondered if this was something that came up in your findings at all or was discussed.
Chair, thank you very much for your question. I'll start off, and I know my team definitely has a lot to add to that. 100% agree with you. And so we actually have multiple recommendations when it comes to training. There's the supervisor manager role. So understanding your roles and responsibilities for that perspective. There's the employees with regards to understanding generally what violence and harassment looks like. And then again, more situationally for their environment, because it's very different if you are a lifeguard at a pool versus if you are a manager sitting at an office desk. What violence and harassment might look like could be very, very different. And you raise a very good point. That being said, obviously we emphasize in our report that every employee has a responsibility if you witness these things, but it's helping to understand what these pieces are. But I'll look to my staff to add to that.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you for the question. I do agree that this question is better suited for management, but just to give you some context, the Workplace Safety and Compliance Unit does actually have a process and mechanisms for domestic violence, because especially with COVID, the workplace extended to the household. And so, you know, with people working from home, that would fall under the city's responsibility to support employees if they're undergoing instances of domestic violence. So I just wanted to provide you that context, but I think management might be better suited to respond and provide more context.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, and I believe my second question's for staff, so I'll get back in line.
All right, thank you. So that looks to be the end of questions for the Auditor General, unless anyone was confused. But now we can go to questions for staff, and Councillor Hubley has one, I think, ahead of you, Councillor Carr. So shall I go to Councillor Hubley first, and anyone else start putting your hands up?
Thank you, Chair. So my question will be to the clerk's office as to how can we put the same or stronger rules in place for council as well?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to begin with, I would echo what the Auditor General had stated, which is that councillors' staff as city employees are subject to the workplace violence and harassment policy, procedures, and programs, and the reporting mechanisms that are available to city staff through that program. In addition, and we will, in the Office of the City Clerk, be working with management to ensure that as prevention strategies are developed, as training is developed, that those are also offered to councillors' assistants, and that the relevant manager and supervisor training is also offered to members of council. As it relates to the ability to impose requirements on council, that is something that council can do. We have been directed by the previous council to include a review of councillors' office matters, every governance review at the beginning of the term and at midterm. So if as a result of these discussions or subsequent discussions, there was a desire for council to impose additional mandatory requirements upon members of council, that could be done through the midterm governance review process.
And can you bring us up to speed on Councillor Elspintiri's motion in this area? What's been done with that? Are we going to hear something formally back at council, or does that all address this area of things as well?
Madam Chair, if I recall, there was a motion towards the end of the last term of council that spoke to personal relationships of members and staff. My understanding is the Integrity Commissioner had reviewed that on a preliminary basis and was intending to do further review of this issue in advance of the midterm governance review.
Okay, and my last question in that area would be, has anything been done to look at similar to, I'm going to use the AG's fraud and waste hotline as an example. I really like the idea of anonymous independent reporting instead of, for our staff, for example, instead of having them go to somebody in HR that reports to a manager that their counselor may have a close relationship with. Is there any looking at an independent source that can be accessed either through email or by phone call to get help if they feel that they're being harassed or intimidated or any of the things that we don't want happening?
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. I'm going to go to Cyril Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, as part of our review and our governance that we're going to be committed to going forward, we will look at that. But I do want to reassure you that this is a strictly 100% confidential forum process that we do follow. So all staff are encouraged to come forward, even in the current process and procedures. It is 100% confidential. We're committed to making sure all staff is aware of that, and staff are truly comfortable in coming forward, bringing these difficult discussions forward, these issues and concerns, but we'll definitely take away in terms of looking at that more independent structure to see if that would be feasible or not.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to hearing back from you, Cyril, on that, because I think it's very important that, let's face it, staff that have been around City Hall for a while know what the reality is there, and I think we have to make it a better, safer reality for them. I will say one last comment is, I appreciate that the IC is looking into this and now talking about coming back at midterm governance to talk about that. but I would have hoped there'd be more a sense of urgency to that. I really thought that that would get looked after in the first quarter or second quarter of the term of council. So I'm kind of disappointed that it's really going to be year 3 before we hear back from the IC on such an important issue to protect our staff. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hughley. Councillor Carr?
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions to staff. The first one, and I know my councillor colleague, Councillor Lowe, asked about the survey, how the survey was disseminated. I know from a statistical perspective, 22% might be seen to be quite high for a survey completion. But for an employee survey that is on a topic that is of such importance, I actually find the rate quite low. And I was wondering about the mechanisms that exist within the city through management, what those are in order to ensure that employees fill out surveys such as this. Like, is there a manager's forum? Is there reminders to management to have their employees fill out the survey? You know, managers are typically responsible for HR and financial management. So is there some sort of responsibility that they have in order to try to get the response rates up on important topics such as these? That's my first question.
City Manager?
Yeah, thanks very much. In this particular instance, we supported the Auditor General's office, but we did not directly involve ourselves in this survey because of the work that was being done through the Auditor General. But what I can tell you, in terms of surveys that the city does initiate, we've just done one actually in terms of our employee survey. And we encourage our staff to participate in that. We actually had a high participation rate this time. I believe it was 39%. And what we do is, you know, messaging goes throughout the organization, basically top to bottom and then up again. We use every mechanism available to us in terms of communicating that the survey is out there. We want them to participate. We want to hear from them, whether it's through email communications, direct communications from myself to the entire organization. And, you know, I'm going to say some simple and fun things in terms of engaging their supervisor, booking time so they can actually complete the surveys. We're really encouraging staff to complete surveys because we want to hear from them. We want to hear what's important. We want to hear how they're feeling, and we want to know what our priorities are as leaders in the organization to be able to support them.
Thank you very much. And I'll just note that even with only 22% rate, that the Auditor General did a stellar job on the report and recommendations. My second question has to do with the question that I originally addressed to the Office of the Auditor General, and it is when you're implementing all of the recommendations that are being made, if you could speak to how you're including the domestic violence piece in training materials, awareness, or any of the other recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. So our policy does capture domestic violence, captures all components of workplace violence and harassment. All of our employees, managers, senior leaders, staff receive training in which domestic violence is a component of that training. We also have specific sources available to the organization to support any staff on domestic violence related issues or concerns. And we're also here as well to provide support to the organization from a support perspective in terms of catering different components of the training, procedures, policies to specific different dynamics of the variety of departments that we serve. So domestic violence is a very important component of our overall policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Lowe?
Thank you, Chair. A rehash of that question to the Auditor General, like, in terms of the work that we contract out, what is our reach in terms of things like this? And do we look for things? Do we look for like their own policies? Do we look to sort of, I don't know, semi-impose our policies on them if, in the procurement phase for contractors?
Madam Chair, I'll start the answer, and then Will, my Chief Procurement Officer, can add to me. But all contractors, any individual working with the city, are required to adhere to our policies. So we impose that strictly, but I can ask Will to kind of top me up from a procedural procurement perspective.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, all contractors are subject to the Occupational Health and Safety Act and our policies, as Mr. Rogers pointed out, as terms of their contracts. In addition, their interactions with city staff, if we were to become aware of an interaction that we deemed improper, that would be considered a supplier performance issue, and we would address that under our performance provisions.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was helpful. Councillor Hill, and thank you for moving that chair. Councillor, yes, great value. And now you're up if you have questions for staff.
Oh, am I?
Thank you very much. I appreciate Auditor General the report, and I appreciate management the agreement with the recommendations there. Really, my comment is one of the importance of this topic and my perspective on what I would call checkbox training. And what I want to make sure is that from a city perspective, we don't go into this with the perception that, okay, it's coming up to Christmas time, we've got 18 different things we need to do this checkbox training of 2 hours online, checking the box, done, and then we forget about it for 364 days a year. Important things like this, it's cultural, and it needs to be ingrained in the fabric of the culture of our organization. And my recommendation is that this be looked at from the perspective of the vision statement or the mission statement of the city itself, so that it's inculcated in the importance of what we do internally, but what we express externally. So my only comment is that we need to make sure that we're treating everyone with dignity and respect 365 days a year, as opposed to just at the end of a 2-hour block of online training. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have a comment or anything they want to say?
Madam Chair, I would just thank you for that comment. You had my assurance. I think you've heard our city manager talk to this. My colleagues on the floor in terms of the leadership team, I think you have our commitment that this is not a check the box exercise by no means or any stretch of imagination. And for me, success is not 0%. Success is this is part of our living culture as individuals and all staff members, that when we come to work, that all these components of policy and procedures and workplace harassment is adhered to on a daily basis. So by no means will this be check the box from an audit perspective or any perspective from myself, from the city's senior leadership team, and support of the organization.
Great. Thank you very much for that. So committee members, we have a recommendation in front of us. Oh, do I have somebody else? Sorry, Teresa.
Thank you. I thought I'd just go one more time.
It's okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Now, in terms of the report, it's very thorough. And one of the things you talk about is that you couldn't deal with everything you're dealing with, basically, harassment and sexual violence, et cetera. But the other issue that sometimes things can't be separated, but in terms of racism and other factors, I don't know how that's handled. So I don't know if that's a question for you or for staff, but just in terms of sometimes it's complaints employee to employee, not necessarily managers. So I just want to get some sort of, since it's not in the report, I guess it's management too, that we're also working on those issues as well of systematic racism.
Yeah, through the chair, again, you have our reassurance, my reassurance, Wendy's reassurance, the leadership team. This is a component of the full gamut of workplace harassment. We work closely with Clara's team in terms of the anti-racism strategy and equity and diversity. So all components are part of this process. And there's no one component that's more important than the other. They're all important, they're all a priority. So this is the focus for us. Yes.
I appreciate it. I think sometimes they can there's blurs because sometimes things can be treated in one category or another, and they can be both sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. So we have a recommendation to carry, though that the audit committee receive the audit report and recommend that council consider and approve the recommendations. Is this item carried? Thank you. All right. So now we move on to item 4.3, but this item we will need to move a motion to add this to the agenda for today's meeting. Vice Chair Brown, can you please read the motion?
Thank you, Chair. Whereas the report, along with the supporting documentation titled Office of the Auditor General Investigation of the Manotick Business Improvement Area Expenses, was not listed on the Audit Committee agenda. Therefore, be it resolved that the Audit Committee approve the addition of this report for consideration by the committee at today's meeting pursuant to Section 89, Paragraph 3 of the Procedure Bylaw.
Thank you. Is that carried? Carried. Okay, so Auditor General.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Si on peut partager la présentation, s'il vous plaît. Le prochain rapport que nous souhaitons vous présenter aujourd'hui est celui de l'enquête sur les dépenses de la zone d'amélioration commerciale de Manotick, qui porte en particulier sur le rôle de la ville d'Ottawa. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. This investigation was conducted as a result of a report received through the city's fraud and waste hotline. The OAG received allegations in relation to potential inappropriate expenses incurred by the Manotick Business Improvement Area. A separate report has been issued and presented to the Manotick BIA Board. The board responses were approved at their September board meeting. That report is being brought to the Audit Committee today for information purposes only. As part of this investigation, we identified opportunities where the city can play a greater role in supporting BIAs and enabling strengthened expenditure management and governance. This is the report that is being tabled today with Audit Committee and for which our presentation will be the subject of. To give members a little bit of background, the Municipal Act governs all 19 BIAs that we have here in the City of Ottawa. The mandate for BIAs is to oversee the improvement, beautification, and maintenance of municipally owned buildings, lands, and structure that go beyond what is currently covered by the expense of the municipality. And that's done to promote the area as a business or shopping district to attract residents and visitors. Each BIA is governed by a board of management. The board of management is independent and responsible for managing the affairs of the BIA. That's just wanting to really assure everyone that they are separate, independent from the City of Ottawa. While boards have overall responsibility for expenditure management, the city plays a role in certain BIA processes, which include the annual budget approval, collection of the levies, payment processing for BIA expenses, as well as financial reporting. Accordingly, the city has a level of responsibility and is in the best position to support BIAs in effectively discharging their responsibilities. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. There are two findings associated with the city's role relative to BIAs. The first is related to the support the city can provide to BIAs for expenditure management policy development, as well as implementation. In June of 2021, Council directed each BIA board to adopt and provide mandatory governance documents to city staff. City staff provided some guidance and templates to facilitate this implementation. We expected that the city would have provided more fulsome guidance to assist BIAs in implementing the mandatory requirements. For example, guidance could have been provided onto what should be included in an effective expenditure management policy to ensure prudent use of funds. For the Manotick BIA specifically, we noted that their policy document that they submitted met the minimum requirements that were outlined within the bylaw for BIAs. However, it lacked fundamental elements of what we would consider to be sound procurement expenditure management policy. As a result of this, we also decided to sample a few additional policies from other BIAs, and we noticed similar types of issues. So it's important to note that for all BIAs to have comprehensive expenditure management policies in place in order to guide financial practices and supporting their ability to achieve their mandate. So given the city's expertise with developing financial policies, the city is a useful resource for enabling BIAs to develop and implement their procurement and expense management policies. The second finding is related to formal onboarding and training for BIA staff as well as board members. To effectively fulfill their roles and responsibilities, BIA staff as well as board members are expected to understand, obviously, the BIA itself, the organization, the relevant bylaws, policies, key processes, as well as be familiar with expenditure management principles. I'm sure you're all aware, staff at BIAs have differing level of expertise. And so while the Ottawa Coalition of Business Improvement Areas provides orientation for specifically only BIA board members, the city does not provide any formal onboarding or training for new BIA staff or board members related to the city's role and their expectations of BIAs. Formal training is an opportunity to provide standardized messaging on principles of governance, expenditure management, roles and responsibilities, as well as key city processes that are relevant to the management of a BIA. As a result of this investigation, we made 3 recommendations to city staff, and they were all agreed to. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Madame la Présidente, nous serions heureuses de répondre aux questions des membres du comité relatives à ce rapport. Merci.
All right, committee members, questions for the Auditor General? Vice Chair Brown?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to thank the Office of the Auditor General for undertaking this investigation. I know I've spoken with the Board of Managers at the Manotick Business Improvement area. They're fully committed to upgrading their policies and procedures, and I know they're very thankful for your involvement as well. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to seek a bit of clarification on something you mentioned there. You said after scanning some surrounding BIAs, there were, it indicated similar reporting issues. Did the scan of surrounding BIAs highlight Manotick's issues, or did it actually highlight issues in every BIA or most BIAs?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the question, Councillor. So obviously, first and foremost, we were reviewing the Manotick's BIA's policies. That obviously raised some concerns, and we were wondering whether or not this could be more of a pervasive issue. So we sampled, again, just a small number. Some had more, more meat within their policies, but others did not. And so we realized that, just providing recommendations to the Manotick BIA may not necessarily help the issue that could be a larger one at hand.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other questions for staff. Sorry, for the Auditor General. Any questions for staff? I'm seeing no questions for staff. Okay, so we have an motion that the Audit Committee receive the investigation of Manotick Business Improvement Area expenses, role of the City of Ottawa report, and recommend that Council consider and approve the recommendations. And that the Audit Committee recommend Council receive the investigation of Manotick Business Improvement Area expenses report. Is this item carried? Carried. Okay, so now we will be moving in camera. So just a second, I have to switch pages.
Can I read it? So, Chair, I do have a motion. Therefore, be it resolved that in accordance with Procedure Bylaw 2022-410, the Audit Committee resolve in camera pursuant to subsection 13(1)A, the security of the property of the city, based upon the rationale set out in the legal implications section of the report titled Office of the Auditor General, Preliminary Report on Cybersecurity, in order to receive a presentation from the Auditor General.
Okay, so and you, as I said earlier, you'll have a Teams link that you'll have to go to for this meeting. And so that motion then, is that motion carried? Carried. All right. We'll just need a couple minutes to get into the separate meeting.
Madam Chair, we'll need about 5 or 10 minutes just to make sure everyone's connected and the room is cleared.
All right, 5 or 10 minutes then. Thank you.
Check, check, check.
Okay. For the benefit of those joining us online, the audit committee just met in camera in order to discuss the Office of the Auditor General OAG preliminary report on cybersecurity. These matters will not be reported out as they relate to subsection 13(1)A, the security of the property of the city. During the in-camera session, no votes were taken other than procedural motions and/or directions to staff. All right, committee members, the report recommendation is that the audit committee receive the preliminary report on cybersecurity and recommend that council consider and approve the recommendations. Is this item approved? All right, it's approved. All right, so now we go back to our regular agenda. And we are at item 6 now, notices of motion for consideration at subsequent meetings. Are there any notice of motions? None? Inquiries, are there any inquiries? Seeing none. Other business, any other business? I don't see any other business. All right, well, our next regular meeting is November 27th, 2020.